everyone. We'll start the meeting. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning again. We'll start off with agenda approval. Is there any additions or subtractions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Sheriff Aukus is going to be here this morning. He's been notified they received a grant for DWI enforcement.
Okay.
So he wants to possibly ask for an additional deputy for that position.
Alrighty.
So we'll work him in whenever he can.
So, Mr. Chair, I just have to ask Jeff, I thought we were going over Corey's budget, but we're not doing that today?
That has been rescheduled to the 6th because Scott was not going to be here today.
Okay, thank you.
And then the other item is item 10A. I do not have an update from the broker, so we'll have to carry that. When we do have it, we may have to call a special meeting to have that conversation.
Okay. With that, can I get a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Thank you, Shar.
Second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Public input. Would you like to come to the podium here? Give us your name and address.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Stanfeld. I am a township supervisor in Mantrap Township. And I'm coming here to ask for help because we have lost our road contractor, Levi. I have been working on this since last fall. At that time, we had a contractor willing to do the work. And I just found out this April that that contractor no longer is going to be able to do that for us. I have exhausted every place that I know where to go. I made a map for you. We've prioritized. I went and did a school route, if you see, and then some of the school routes are also mail routes, obviously. And if you turn the page over, I actually even broke it down into what roads and the miles. So, I'm begging. We have no road contractor. We're going to be sending out a letter to our Mantrap Township residents, informing them of our dilemma. We've gotten many calls about people wanting to just plow their own roads. Well, with a pickup, that only goes so far, and then there's liability issues, and, you know, we're not really excited about that, but that's exactly what I think people are going to start doing. So what I'm asking the county is, and what I'm asking the county engineer is to go for your resources. I'm tapped out. I don't know where else to go. I don't know what else to do. I'm asking for help. If nothing else, give us this winter, and then we will continue, obviously, because we need spring, and, you know, road maintenance is more than plowing. But right now, the dilemma is the plowing.
So have you reached out to other townships to get the names of who they're using and called them to see if
Correct.
they have name, and they don't have
Correct.
names for anybody?
Nevis Township has their own equipment, but they're looking for a driver. And as of last, they have not found a driver. The other townships are covered by the contractors that are in this area, and I have contacted them numerous times, offering them a monthly stipend so that they could hire, and, you know, because if it doesn't snow, then, you know, that would be too much for us. And I've gotten no response. I've gotten, yes, we'll get back to you. They've gotten this. I'm exhausted. I don't know what else to do, and I'm looking for direction and help. And please plow our road, you know. So we've informed the schools. We've informed the post office of our dilemma. We're just trying to get ahead of it. So any help would be greatly appreciated. If you have any suggestions for us, yeah, it would be greatly
Have you
appreciated.
guys attempted to put in requests for bid out at all?
Excuse me?
Have you attempted to put a request for bids out?
Yes, since March. We've had it in the paper, we've had it on our webpage. It's word of mouth, calling, begging. We've done it all. You know, and Levi's been our road contractor for over 20 years. So it's new territory for all of us. And according to Levi, next year he will be leaving more townships. So it won't just be us and Thorpe. Thorpe is out too right now. And I think they have a private gentleman that's gonna do their roads, but that's pretty much minimal road care. But next year Levi says he's gonna give up more. So eventually, over the next few years, he will be totally out of it. Maybe just do where he lives. Any questions? Thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. You have my contact information, you do. If you could get back to me so I could get back to our board, I would highly appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any other public comment? Alrighty, we'll move on to the consent agenda. There again, any additions or subtractions? Alrighty. Can you approve? Thank you, Tom.
I'll second.
Thank you, Shar. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried. Employee recognition. In the Highway Department, we have Jeremy Meyer, Traffic Services Technician, is recognized for 7 years of service from August 3rd of 2015 to August 9th of 2022. The Sheriff's Department, we have Jessica Kukowski, Dispatcher Jailer, began the part-time position on August 2nd, 2022. Casey Fitzpatrick, Dispatcher Jailer, began the full-time position on August 3rd, 2022. Michael Holman, Dispatcher Jailer, began the full-time position on August 4th, 2022. In Social Services, we have Alexander Navi Eller, Social Worker, Children's Services, began the full-time position on August 15th, 2022. And Craig Kilmer, Transit Dispatcher, began the full-time position on August 15th, 2022. Welcome aboard to those that have just joined, and now we'll move on to Veteran Services.
Good morning. Thank you for your time.
Morning, Jerry.
I gave a brief last week about what I'll be using for my budget for the fiscal year 2022-2023. Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs $10,000 grant. Most of it will be used for outreach, a lot of it for training, and just getting out there and seeing veterans. We will continue to partner up with other service organizations throughout the community to do events that doesn't cost anything to the county as well. As an example, this morning we're having Coffee with Vets at the American Legion. We just pulled up and we're sitting in the parking lot and just having coffee, and a half a dozen people showed up, so it's great. So we'll continue to do that. I think it's a really good resource of these funds to get out there and let the veterans know that we're out there and support them. So I'm just here asking to allow me to submit for our $10,000. Normally, I do this in the spring following the county budget that goes from January to December. This grant goes from July to June, but if I apply early, I'll have to carry those funds over, but then I can use it for a longer period of time, so it just makes sense to do it this time. I'll work with Kay's office to make sure everything works out well. Any questions?
Also move.
Thank you, Shar.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Dave. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
I have one question. I was reading an article just recently, this was about getting the GI Bill and how there's been abuse by some in that area. Like schools maybe closing or not being able to finish.
Unfortunately, there has been some abuse in some of these government programs, obviously, and unfortunately there is. I have read that there's a couple of institutions that fraudulently took these funds from the government and also from the veteran and precluded them from graduating. I believe there were some funds, I think last year or this year, that with the GI Bill, that would normally not pay for those bills, to make sure that it's not on the veteran to pay back that. So I think there is some relief. Hopefully it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, normally we're pretty good about that, but if a large institution closes, I mean, there's not much we can do. But it's nice to see that they are using some of those funds to protect the veteran. So yeah, it happens, and they are taking care of who we can. Minnesota State, the Minnesota government really helps out with our veterans as well. If the feds don't jump in to help, the state has really helped out as well. And I haven't heard any issues for our local veterans. It's a national issue, I think. We're pretty lucky up here.
I was wondering if most of it locally is okay. That's good.
Locally, I think we're okay. We haven't. Believe me, if the veterans were upset, they'd call me.
Okay.
We get phone calls. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Highway and survey.
Good morning.
Morning.
First item on our agenda is our county highway map. This map, our current map, was put together back in 2017. We worked with a company out of Duluth. They did the whole setup of it. We reviewed it, make sure all the inaccuracies were corrected. At that time, it cost just under $2,000, $1,920 to put the map file together. And then we had to order maps through a different printing company out there. And we ordered 2,000 maps at that time. I think it was $2,300, right around there. Just 2 years ago, we ended up restocking our supply and ordered another 3,000 maps. And at that time, the decision was made by the board to not charge for the highway map. We have these being distributed by the Chamber of Commerce, by first and second floor here, and we've got them available at our office, of course, too. And so when the decision was made to not charge for those, then, you know, pretty nice for the people coming to visit the area. They can get the map, and on the back of it, then it's got the trails, the recreational information too. So anyway, we're running low on maps, so we're wondering what the direction of the board would be in moving forward. Do we want to update the map? There you're looking at, you know, I'd have to get new quotes on that, but, you know, $2,000 or a little bit better to have a new map put together. And then we'd have to, you know, order the maps too, and I would recommend at that time, I guess, based upon pricing, but probably another 3,000 maps. Should be good for, you know, 2, possibly 3 years.
So what would have changed on the maps?
There'd be very minimal changes, maybe a little bit to the recreational trails, and then some roads maybe had switched from, maybe they were gravel at the time, now they're bituminous, or they're no longer a local road, they would be considered a township road, so there'd be minor changes to that. Not a lot. We took a quick look through, there's not a lot of changes. I don't know that it warrants spending the $2,000 on redoing it. Maybe at this time, if it's just gonna be another 2 years on a resupply, maybe we go ahead with that. It's about half the price. And so I'd get quotes on that, bring that to the next board meeting, or 2 board meetings from now, we get them under order. We're under 500 maps left, so that would be my recommendation, that we continue using the current map. We think it's a good map, and then we'll look at it in a couple years, so.
I like that recommendation.
Okay, I'll bring that back so that you can table this. I don't need an approval or anything for up to a certain amount. We'll bring it back to you at the time, so.
I don't think we should charge either. It's a great service for tourism and for
Yeah.
local people. We
It's,
use ours all the time.
They're flying out the door, so yeah, there's a lot of people using them, and it's good to have the info out there.
You feel the same way?
Yeah. If there's not enough changes to justify the cost,
Yeah.
just keep printing them.
Okay, I'll bring that quote back next time.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, before we do the update, I just have a question for Jed and the board. Would this be an item to put on the next work session? I mean, I know this isn't our responsibility, but yet I think it warrants discussion, because it sounds like down the road, there's gonna be multiple townships that are having this problem.
And I don't know what we can do if we have enough capacity at the highway department to contract to this township or other townships in need, but yeah, it could, I don't know what our agenda looks like. Of course, that'll be like 4 weeks away.
Yeah.
September's pretty full, isn't it?
We can move it to October, but I think we're.
We do have a transportation committee meeting on Friday, the 26th, and I think that'd be a good place to kick around some ideas.
Yeah, put it in committee.
Do that at the committee level.
I think just for informational, I think there's some things that we can do prior to getting it to be an actual, a board agenda item. I think we need to reach out to these contractors because we also employ some of these contractors for some of our gravel maintenance. And what we do is on paper, we've got, a little over 100 miles that is contracted out, but the way in which we use the contractors is that we'll use them early on in the process when we get a snowfall so that the road is open. We'll go back with our forces and we'll either salt the road or, wing out wider. But maybe there's some things that we can do with some of these contractors to see if they're able to free up some time to take some of these on. That's kind of a little input into what we've been discussing at our Safety and Transportation Committee. But we should look at those before asking you to move forward on any type of a recommendation on how to handle this.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, then we got project updates.
Sure. Our County Highway 7 project has a few minor cleanup items with marked sand and gravel. There's some construction signs out there and some erosion control that needs to be cleaned up, and they've been informed of that. Our Knife River Materials project on our County Highway 16 from Trunk Highway 71 to the Cass County line is essentially coming to an end. The paving and shouldering is completed. There's some pavement marking and some project details along with some cleanup that needs to be completed. I expect that to happen within next week to 10 days, depending on the weather. Our County Road 119 project along with County Road 82, we got a pre-construction meeting coming up about a week from now, and we expect that to get going around or shortly after the 1st of September. And we're currently advertising for bids on the Nevis Township Bridge Replacement Project on Fairwood Drive, so yeah, that's about it. If there's any questions.
I've got a meeting in Walker a week from Friday, and I'll plan on taking 16 to see how that goes.
All right.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, it turned out nice. The ride is very nice on it, so. That's it.
Any questions?
Good, thanks.
Thank you. Natural Resource Management. Good morning.
Good morning. First item on the agenda, excuse me, this morning is the transfer of lease number 14 from Mr. Donald Johnson, who has passed away, to his son, Michael Johnson. We have inspected this cabin multiple times, and it is in good order. We haven't had no problems with it. The only minor problem that we've had was their lease card was not up to date, and every time we've requested that they update their lease card, they put the new one in the window, and so it's just a matter of timing. I think that, we send the lease cards out early in the spring, after they pay their lease, and they don't get up there until fall. And so they don't have the current lease card in there, so when they get up there for deer hunting, they stick new card in the window, and so it's just minor issues like that, but we're recommending that we allow the transfer of this lease.
Does the board have any questions?
All in the same family too,
Pardon?
all in the same family almost.
Yep.
Yep. No problem.
Got a motion?
Sure, I'll move.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Second item on the agenda is the policy for easements on tax forfeited land. If you remember, during the work session, I brought this up. We've made some changes to the private easement policy, where we were having some issues with mortgage companies, title insurance companies regarding transfer, or the easements not transferring automatically upon the sale of land. And in meeting with the county attorney's office, we've worked out where easements policy, that where the easements would transfer upon sale of land. It's more based on requirements that the landowner be following zoning ordinances and statutes and those kind of things. If there's a land use change that would create an issue where they're having some significant environmental or natural resource management impacts, county board could go back and take a look at those and possibly revoke an easement. One question that I had at the last meeting, the work session, was whether we wanted to keep the statement in there that easements would not be considered for parcels that are being considered for a plat. I checked with county zoning office, and they require, and for a plat, that the road has a public road frontage, and easements do not constitute public road frontage. So this would not, if they're considering a parcel for a plat, they would have to get the township to accept, or the county would have to accept an easement and turn it into a public road. So private easements would not be considered for road, or for plats. So that eliminates that issue. There is the minor subdivisions and the administrative subdivision issues. I made sure that there's a note in here that says that if they do a minor subdivision or administrative subdivision process, that each one of the parcels that they're subdividing would have to have its own individual easement. And that's just by statute that, if they subdivide a 40 into 8 lots or 5 lots or whatever it might be, each one of those would have to have their own individual easement. So it's in the policy now, so that's the way we got it. So all the easements would be reviewed by my office and then sent through to the county engineer's office and the zoning administrator's office just for review, see if there's any issues that they can see that might create an issue. So and just looking to update our policy and move forward.
Okay. Any questions?
What are some of the costs in creating an easement? You got of course, the recording and.
Yep, of course, the applicant would have to pay for a survey, or provide a survey, whether the legal description has to be clear enough that we can identify where that is. I mean, if it's right along a section line, may not need a legal survey, but in most cases, it's gonna require a legal survey. And they also have to pay the appraised value of the land that they are using. And we currently are charging $1,500 an acre for that. So then there's the application fee, which is $150, basically covers the minimum cost of an easement. I mean, if they're just if they're crossing 50 feet of tax forfeited land to get into their property, we charge a minimum of $100, and then there's also a $46 recording fee. So we said $150, that's the minimum we're gonna charge them for the deposit. And then when the easement is approved by the county board, then we go back and bill them for whatever the land values is minus that $150 deposit, so.
And if they did have to put significant money in the clearing of a road, it's still non-exclusive then, is that right?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion?
Sure, I'll move to approve.
Good. I'll second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Environmental Services.
Good morning.
Morning.
Got a couple items for you this morning. The first is a conditional use permit amendment application. And it's by Bonnie Brand, Lakes Area Windsurfing, that operates Pinecone Camp on Big Sand Lake. They're looking to amend multiple conditions of their existing permit. Let's see, the first would be there's a condition specifying what property is allowed to be part of the resort, so they're looking to amend that to include some additional adjoining property to give them more elbow room to help them with meeting impervious surface requirements as well as shore impact zone natural vegetation requirements. The next would be amending a condition that specifies the number of dwelling units that can be rented out to the public. They're looking to take an existing unit and make that into 2 units instead of 1, not changing the square footage of the space that's habitated. And then they're also looking at possibly redoing the lodge structure on the property in the next coming years, depending on pricing of construction costs. And if that project were to occur, then there would be additional units that would be allowed in that new project. I believe there'd be 3. There'd be one called Up North, another called Cedar, and then a third called Honeymoon.
Eric, I got a question on that, because I did read that construction is being put off because of costs. So if this is approved, is there a time period that construction needs to be done, or is it just, it's approved and then whatever the person decides?
There's a 2-year sunset clause on an initial conditional use permit. That's when it's first approved, but there is no sunset provision for amendments to that permit, so there really wouldn't be any
Okay, thank you.
concern there other than running the risk of the ordinance changing in some way that would not allow the addition due to the fact that it's a non-conforming structure. But currently, the ordinance would allow a permit for the structure to be rebuilt.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The next 2 conditions are a request to allow an additional dock to be placed on the Big Sand side of the property. That would be for use by a couple of the smaller cabins on the southeast side of the property. There wouldn't be any watercraft placed there, just a dock for somebody to go out and sit and enjoy the view. And then the last condition would be a modification to the areas of the shore impact zone that are required to be in natural vegetation. The ordinance requires 50% of the overall shore impact zone to be in natural vegetation. And so they've laid out a proposal to adjust some of the area that was required to be vegetated on Big Sand that hasn't been, and move that over to the Loon Lake shoreline instead. So those are the changes that were requested, and the Planning Commission recommended approval, as you'll see in the submitted documents, with one recommended condition concerning the septic systems on the property. There isn't a whole lot of room for additional septic space, and in the review of the application, staff identified that several of the systems are technically undersized for the occupancy that's they're being advertised at. So the Planning Commission recommended a condition that flow meters be installed on those septic systems to monitor the water usage. So then we have some actual hard data that we can use. If that data shows that everything is properly sized based on actual flow, then no work would need to occur to those systems. If the water usage data would show that, yes, those systems are undersized, then we'd require that those get upgraded. So that was the one condition that the Planning Commission recommended.
Okay.
So I also read that there wasn't a lot of room for alternate sites. So if one of these needed to be upgraded, would a mound system be put in then?
Wouldn't necessarily have to be a mound system. That has more to do with whether they can meet the 3-foot vertical separation requirement between what's called the periodically saturated soil layer. Fancy way of saying where the water table is present long enough to leave evidence of its being there in the soil profile. So if they can meet that separation requirement, an in-ground system could be installed. So the elbow room is more just a general elbow room issue. It doesn't, a mound doesn't, takes up a little more space than an in-ground, but not a huge amount. And the applicant is with us this morning if you had any questions for her.
You're okay with the conditions?
Yeah, and the meters are spending, a little hard to get as well. But I've already contacted them to talk about installation.
Okay. With that comment then, Eric, is there a timeline where she has to have the meters installed by?
As drafted, excuse me, in your packet, the condition was recommending by January 1st of next year.
Okay.
That was so that we'd have that data available for us for all of next year's operating season. And then we'd receive that by the 1st of October of next year, so that then we could analyze it and then, identify if we need to make any upgrades to any of the systems. And then after that, years of data being submitted to us, then the idea would be that they'd retain that information in years subsequent, and then if and when the county ever had need of seeing that data, that they'd be required to be able to supply that within 15 days of our asking for it. Just so we could, something comes up, building permit or something is requested, and then we can make sure that the system is still operating within capacity.
Okay.
The other few places where you've done that, has it been working relatively well? Have you been getting the data?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind, is no longer operating.
Right.
So, we have,
And they didn't do an automatic one, I don't think, did they? So they
n-
were manually reading the meter,
yeah.
and are you
and then-
gonna do automatic?
Well, yeah, manually is.
Yeah, it's some, yeah.
Very unrealistic.
There was another, it was a restaurant that put in a automatic meter, and that made things much easier for getting the info to us, and I think they recognized that that was the way to go. They had initially balked at that, but I think after it was in, they realized
The alternate
much
is
time saver.
you have to upgrade to meet max capacity, correct?
Mhm.
So your options aren't real great.
You were there, did you have any comments for the board on discussion, or?
Well, I was gonna ask one question. In the packet, there was this one diagram of the nibbler system, and with only one, drain field site, this would be a good opportunity to maybe use one of those, because that's pretty clean water that comes out of that. And I think it's been tested pretty extensively, or not tested, but used extensively out in Europe. And I was talking to Tim about it, Tim Johnson, and he said that water is almost as clean enough to drink. Not that you would want to, but he said it's pretty clean when it comes out of that. So, that would be a good idea. If you only got room for one drain field, that'd be a good idea to put one of those in. Then you can go many, many years, probably indefinitely with the drain field. Just a thought.
I didn't understand the beginning. What system?
It was in the packet of information that came with this.
Okay.
It's a septic tank that has a system called the nibbler system.
Okay.
It's essentially an oxygenation tool that uses air injection into a tank to oxygenate the effluent and facilitate the greater degree of breakdown of the effluent than would be if there wasn't that unit in place. So the upside is it allows the system to have better treatment, and you can sometimes reduce the size of the drain field. The downside is obviously it's more cost, and you've got to have ongoing maintenance and monitoring to make sure that it's performing properly. But yes, that is definitely an option.
Particularly when you only have room for one drain field. And like if it's a smaller drain field, maybe there would be room for an alternate site then. So, you know, that's why something, just a thought.
Is there any other questions?
I'll move to adopt the recommendation of the Planning Commission and its finding of facts.
Thank you, David. I'll second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried.
I just have a comment. I've driven, when I was on the planning commission, I remember coming out to your facility, and also, when I drive by, it's just very neatly kept.
Thank you, we work really hard. Also just wanted to comment that helping resorts stay open, I can't tell you how many families that coming there is incredibly important to them. Also bringing revenue into the county. I mean, they're coming from Nebraska, Iowa, Minneapolis, North Dakota, and I mean, just the opportunity to operate and see these families making memories and growing stronger as families is the reason why I do this. I think some people might think we're crazy because it's just a lot of work. But I appreciate your comment very much and appreciate the board. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and the second and final item that I have for the board this morning is a proposal for entering into a software agreement for our permitting software needs within the department. To summarize, I should say what's in my packet materials. We have a current software that was developed in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's an access database that was custom created for us by ProWest and Associates. It's long enough in the tooth that Microsoft is moving away from access. ProWest doesn't have the staff any longer that originally developed this. They've retired, so keeping it up is becoming more of an issue. It also lacks a lot of the functionality that we're looking for, as well as what the public's expecting now as far as online applications, ability to pay online, a lot of mobile device usage by the public as well as by staff. So we have vetted over 12.5 vendors in the last year or two, and we're able to come down to one that we recommend entering into an agreement with, and that is the South Central Planning and Development Commission, which has a product called My Government Online. They're a governmental entity down in Louisiana that was in a similar position to us over 16 years ago. They couldn't find a private vendor that provided a software that met their needs, so they decided to make one themselves. And oddly enough, for government, they've done a very good job at it and made a product that we feel is better than what's offered in the private sector, and it's also at a much lower cost. So that's who we're recommending to go with, and because they are a governmental entity, they can enter into this agreement with us through what's called an intergovernmental agreement, and that's something that I've run by county attorney as well as Jeff, our administrator, and verified that we can do so without having to obtain additional quotes from other vendors, even though I do have pricing that I've looked at from the number 2, number 3, number 4 vendors. Happy to go into more detailed depth as to what the software would allow us to do, but the nice thing is they only bill once we go live, as opposed to a lot of them start billing you as soon as you sign the agreement. They can work with us. They're very flexible as to when we start onboarding, and we can do that at a slower pace to start with, and then get more into it this fall, winter when we've got time. The hope would be that we'd have part of this able to be operational by the start of next construction season. Ideally, we'd have everything, but I know how things can go, so I don't want to overshoot the target. Cost-wise, we're looking at an amount that's below what the private sector is offering, and it's also able to be covered in that first year through the Recorder's Compliance Fund that they've been setting aside money for this purpose that would cover that, so it's not a budget concern for next year. And then in subsequent years, since it would be a recurring cost, then we would look to roll that integrated into the environmental services budget for future years.
So in spite of, the private one was almost twice the price, and then, you felt this was a better coverage. I'm just curious, Forte, you've had problems finding software that works with that. So did the private sector would they work with Forte also?
There were one or two that would, but they weren't in the upper cutoff as far as what vendors were able to meet our needs. So that was kind of the rub that we ran into, is if they worked with Forte, then the rest of their product was
Okay, because that's a selling feature in itself.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, the other thing that's probably distinguishes this from the others is this has true GIS functionality. So a lot of them would say that they were GIS software, but then when you get into the nitty gritty and ask them, okay, can you create a point on the map that has GPS coordinates and say that belongs to this permit? The answer was no. My Government Online is the only one that says, no, we can actually create a point and associate that with that record. And the value there is it then allows us all kinds of reporting options that we lack. And then for parcel maintenance, when a subdivision occurs, previously we had a manual process of trying to figure out old records that are of varying states of detail. Where does this permit belong once a property is subdivided? So once we can start collecting points of where these things are located, it will make that much easier. You'll be able to see that on a screen and say, okay, these records are on parcel A, these records are on parcel B. And it just fits the overall goal I've had for over a decade now of trying to get everything tied with the GIS hub using parcel numbering so that we can start pulling more data in and having the data work between departments better than it has been able to.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Shar.
I'll second.
Thank you, David. It sounds like what you need at the best price. And
You aware of any other county ESOs using it?
Not within the state of Minnesota, but there are a number of counties that I had reached out to when doing the research that were in other states, and they all had extremely positive feedback as far as their experience, both with the product as well as the customer service.
Good.
Does this, a permit that's supplied through this, does that connect with the assessor office as far as updating them when, say, a garage was added or something like that?
There will be, we can do unlimited numbers of custom reports, so yes, we would be able to share that permitting information with the assessor's office so that they could then let the locals know to be able to go out and.
Is that your intent with it?
Partly, yeah. We've had that capability with the current software, albeit in a limited functionality, but yeah, that would definitely be a aspect that we'd continue to want to work with. With it being tied into GIS again too, we can pull the data from the database and use it to create different applications as well, GIS applications, so we might be able to once we start pulling that data in and have the software operational, then we'll have to see what would work best for getting that to the assessors in the most efficient way possible.
There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, do you want to go to the sheriff office?
Sure. Corey, if you're ready.
Thank you for letting me squeeze in here, but we just got notice that we received a grant for a DWI enforcement, position from the state of Minnesota. This is a fully funded position for a deputy sheriff to do strictly DUI enforcement. And I'm here today, the position starts, the funding would start October 1st, so I'm here today to ask for permission to post for that position. Or officially, maybe Gina would recommend we add to my complement of employees to include one DUI enforcement officer, however we want to word that. But to get ahead of the hiring process, because obviously it takes a few weeks to get somebody hired, I'm asking if we could get started on that now.
So how much is the grant for?
I think it's $125,000 a year.
And how many years do you have the grant?
I think it's open every year for reapplication purposes. Obviously, if it went away, that position would go away as well. And I would expect that understanding to be made as well.
The problem with that is they usually never do.
Well, if the grant doesn't go away, the funding
Right.
is still there and it continues on.
Is it a competitive grant every year?
Yes,
So there's no guarantee we'll get the grant every year.
correct.
And the part that scares me about these things is, it's that dangling carrot out there, and then it ends up falling eventually on the local taxpayer. But they get the hook in there.
Well, that's only if you retain it and decide to fund it ourselves. That doesn't mean we have to fund it.
Yeah, but I very seldom do they go away once they're established.
Well, that would be up to the board,
Yeah.
though, to keep that on if they wish, so.
Your position according to statute as well too, and then union contract would be, the person would become a public employee, then that we would have to follow the guidelines through the union contract of whether it would be a layoff if we weren't going to absorb that position any longer, if there was no grant money.
So do the grant dollars cover all of the benefit expenses also?
It's $125,000, so in this case, it would, yes.
So let me get that straight again, Gina. So how's that play in with the union?
That if the position is within the union, if we bring it in via the union, then it would be a union employee. If it goes and passes probationary period, whatnot, then they would be a union member. And then we would have to follow, if we were dissolving it, we would have to follow. I mean, there's possibilities, you could have other persons leave within the department that they could absorb into that position. There's ways to be able to look at it for that particular, person if the grant.
So it may not be so cut and dried to be able to eliminate that.
We'd still be able to eliminate the position. Management rights and the scheduling of staff is always at the discretion of the employer, but we would have to make sure to follow process and provide proper documentation and notice.
And here's what I'll say about this grant. This funding, because it's a public safety, has been around for many, many years. The competitive part of it, which is why, I'll just say why we got it. Hubbard County has the third most DUI arrests in the state of Minnesota. That includes the metro. The competitive part of it is, I'm gonna tell you this, we're gonna be competitive on this. And, so I do not see that going away. The person that would be scheduled for that, we had to put a deputy's name in there, for the grant purposes, cause you have to show what their stats were. And, that's what we did. This person it's a young officer, very active, and, the state simply okayed it.
So are those stats historically like that, or is it a product that we've concentrated more on enforcement?
It's that, yes,
The latter?
the latter. Yep.
So not, so the stat, I don't know how much it means, because if other counties aren't doing the same thing, it's really, there's nothing, how do you compare? But, I'm not arguing the need. I'm strictly worried about the budget part.
So can we make a motion that, to approve this, but somehow put in there, if the grant goes away, then it has,
Dependent on grant funding.
depending on grant funding, how do we do that?
Well, one board can't bind another board, so I mean,
Yeah.
no matter what, you could change it either way.
Well, but that's what I would expect. I would only expect this position to be here if the funding is here completely. Because I understand, budget constraints and, if it wasn't funded, I wouldn't be here. So I would totally expect if somebody makes a motion on this, that I would expect that to be in there.
No, you're not gonna, you're gonna take are you gonna take the deputy that's currently in a sense in this position? Or are you gonna be hiring somebody new?
Nope. We have an internal candidate that would go into that position, but then I need to backfill that deputy sheriff position. So this is an additional officer for the department, but again, it is fully funded.
Okay.
So could this cover what you proposed in the budget with an additional officer?
No.
That would make it really easy.
Yeah, but you can't. No.
I'm sorry, I just hate these kind of grants. I really.
Yeah, it's kind of
I
like
just know
social
where they lead
services
all
saying,
the time, it just,
Yeah.
government creep, it grows and it grows and it grows. And again, I'm not arguing the need, but it's,
But if the funding goes away,
it just never is that easy, Corey. It just never works out like that. There's always a need. And so once it's established, once it's there, it's really hard to eliminate because the need is there. And you adjust to the staffing levels and there's always something.
How does that position work? Because, when you have officers out on patrol, those are the ones who respond to DWI incidences, so how would this position work into that?
well, this would be a proactive position where they strictly do traffic, patrol, for traffic type of incidents, with, DUI enforcement. The other officers, yep, when they have time, they work that as well, but they're handling calls. If a call comes in, they have to go, or a crash comes in, they have to go. This person strictly does DUI enforcement, strictly does, traffic enforcement.
Our jail is already pretty close to full, so, it's good to get these people off the streets, definitely, but probably be putting more pressure on the jail too then.
You could,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's you look at 85% of our DUI arrests, and again, we're third in the state of Minnesota, are for drug DUIs. It's people that are high on meth, high on heroin, pills, and, it's very good to get those people off the street, yes.
so do we have a lot of repeat arrests, same people?
Oh, yes. Yeah, repeat DUI offenders, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's also frustrating, because you do the job, but then they get in the system and,
Where are you gonna put them? And
So
correct
far
me
we-
if I'm wrong, I believe you told me the other day when we met that the requested position is going to be a swap from part-timers, was that correct?
Yes. So both of these positions are, in essence, fully funded.
Yeah, see, that's the struggle, it's hard to say no to it.
Then don't say no.
Well, I understand, but it's like, they know what they're doing down there, and they fund these things, and then the burden shifts.
But in this case, some grants, I agree with you, in this case, they haven't had to do that because the funding has been there
Yeah.
for years. It is, the state of Minnesota has taken a stance as far as the public safety and DUI enforcement. They have TZD grants that we get every year as well. this DUI grant, again, has been there for years. And there is no reason why it wouldn't keep getting renewed as long as you perform. And, we have every intent on doing that.
So then with your budget, this grant will be on the revenue side?
Yes.
And 125 more than covers the cost of an additional deputy. So we would get the whole 125, and it would actually be revenue in excess of need for that position.
I think how it's worded is up to 125, so it's not like we could profit off of it, but it would fully cover a Hubbard County position, yes.
Everything. All costs, benefits, everything.
Yes. Because all that would not exceed 125 in our county.
And even outfitting that officer. I mean, do we have existing equipment to outfit that officer, or are we gonna expend more
Well,
money there that's not covered?
As far as a squad goes, for example, it does not cover the cost of a squad. This is simply, we would keep, like when we're finally able to get squads, just because of manufacturing purposes, we would just retain one longer and that person would get one of those. So I'm not gonna ask for, say, 5 squads, one additional one for the year. No, I'm not doing that at all. I'm not gonna request any additional squads. We will simply absorb that. Yes. So like I say, instead of getting rid of 4 of them one year, we would probably get rid of 3.
I was gonna bring up, during committee reports, the, Mental Health Board, LAC, that was one, I mentioned on Friday, that was one of the topics they were talking about, is an unmet need and people with alcohol issues, and, what can be done on that side of it to cut down on the number of DWIs and the rest. So, that's an area that needs to be worked on too. They were questioning, whether or not there was a halfway house available to them in Hubbard County.
And there is not, that would be something, certainly not in, law enforcement's realm, that would be more like a social services issue, I would say, as far as housing, for that purpose. There's certainly a need for that, I'm not disputing that. And that certainly can help, in the long run, absolutely.
But HIP would also tell you that part of the problem is parents allowing kids to party underage, or kids are seeing parents drunk, driving, whatever. I mean, it's not a cut and dried, it's so,
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's peer pressure and it's
and
like
it's
you're saying,
example,
parenting, and it's a lot of
and
stuff.
coping skills.
You getting a lot of kids in it?
Do we what?
Are you getting a lot of underage people who are DWI?
No, not with DUIs, we get, our share of minor consumptions, but not as far as them driving, no. We don't see that very often, no.
Yeah, you find that they're a lot wiser about it than maybe our generation was?
I'm guessing,
Yeah.
yep, I'm thinking so.
I mean, I've noticed that.
Yep.
They don't mess around with it there.
It's a
The
bigger
penalties
deal now
are
than it
so high.
was
Yeah,
then, yes.
yeah,
Yep. Because yes, back then there was more of it,
right.
substantially more underage getting DUIs.
My only other question is, Jeff, your opinion on how this all fits in, and any concerns with it?
We'll be listening to the Sheriff's Office presentation on September 6th. And one of the things that I talked to Corey and Scott about was to identify the number of staff that we have on in dispatch in the jail and on patrol to provide the level of public service that we want, daytimes, night times, evenings, what the staffing level and schedule are required to carry our current public safety program. And we'll have that information and we'll review that, according with the budget. But as he's presenting this one is outside of that schedule, as I understand it.
So I'm getting ahead because you're not presenting your budget, but I was looking at your budget last night, and you know, we haven't had a chance for a conversation. But if I did the calculations correctly, you're asking for an increase of like 1.57 million.
Yes, you gotta understand though, there's probably $750,000 in there for a big computer upgrade and our
I did
radios.
notice equipment was high, and I know
And
we've
our
talked about the
radios.
400,000.
Yeah, you know, you know, we did have an earmark for the radios, which that funding was pulled from us, so yes, it does look, very high. I mean, I can't argue that, but like I say, we did have two big projects in there that are much needed.
If I just show offsetting the capital improvements, and we haven't accounted for swapping out, taking the $92,000 out of part-time staffing to account for the requested day sergeant. That's $550,000 that comes off of that request. It's still a significantly large request. When I was studying this the last 2 days, it's not a change from 22 to 23. It's a change from 21 to 23. And the big driver is the population at the jail. So if I look at current year budget, the positions that we added this year, and the fact that we're housing our own prisoners and we aren't getting revenue for housing other people's prisoners, I'm guessing we're gonna see a $400,000 shortfall in this year's budget.
Yeah, cause that alone is probably a $400,000, difference, just because we can't house outside inmates. So our own internal costs went up and our revenue went down.
And add
several
both of
hundred
those
thousand.
items for next year, because they weren't in the start of 2022 budget. We're gonna realize them this year, and they're gonna be there next year. That's where you get to the $800,000.
So what kind of arrests are allowing the population to go up in the jail?
The vast, vast majority of it has been DUI arrests.
And what's the average stay with a DUI?
Well, it depends on the person. I don't know the breakdown on DUI versus the other, but, some people are out the next morning, but some people who are on probation, for example, they get their probation revoked and they're with us, for quite a while. Some of them, will get their sentence executed. Some of them will be off to prison, but that doesn't happen for a few months until they go through our court process.
Right, we have to house 'em.
Yeah, so I just, the level of people that are getting arrested these days are not first-time offenders. Like, it's not their first DUI where they get released the next morning when they sober up. It's not been that way. It's been some hardcore people, repeat offenders, the people that are on probation, and a lot of those are staying with us. They really are.
So with putting this officer on, and I'm assuming there'll be more arrests, you don't
Yes.
have room for a lot of people, more people in the jail, so then in addition, we'll have an expense of housing them somewhere else.
Well, here's what I can say to that. When I say more arrests, the person that is going into that position is one of our high arrest people.
Yep, I remember
Okay.
you saying that before.
So,
Yep.
Unless I replace that person with another rock star, for a lack of better terminology, maybe the arrests, don't go up overall. Maybe the person that
Okay.
we backfill is an average DUI arrest, individual. I can't, I don't know. I mean, I can't say that because I have no idea who the person would be that we would backfill. So we are taking our number 2 highest DUI arrest, officer would be going into that position. So in all honesty, it could be a wash as far as the numbers go. It's just that person can concentrate because that person does this very well, and we're gonna let him concentrate on that and only that. And then we will backfill with a deputy sheriff who takes calls and patrols and, is an all-around patrol deputy.
So what do you do if that does happen? Do you house them somewhere else?
Well, if we had too many people that we simply can't handle them, yeah, that we would have to do that, absolutely. We haven't had to do that yet.
Yeah. That's the tough side of it. You know, you enforce it, and then if you're full, it's costing you more.
And you're at about 80% capacity now?
Today we're probably, I wanna say if we're in the seventies, yeah, I would say probably 80%.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you do have a little wiggle room
Oh, yeah,
there.
yeah, we do have room.
Not too much. 80% is actually considered full, because it takes just the right chess pieces to go beyond 80.
It does. Yep, our operating capacity, I believe, is in that, I think, 92 mark, is how many we can have in a 116 bed facility. You know, so when we're in the 70s, we're getting close.
Yeah.
We are. You know, we're hoping, you know, the drug and DUI court, if that gets initiated here coming up, that certainly, you would hope that that would take a little strain off, but again, I can't predict the future that way. Alls I can tell you is this position is funded today. If I thought there was a downfall, I wouldn't have applied for it, and I wouldn't be here asking to fill it.
And as far as his budget, you know, I'm not too worried about the capital expenditures. There's ways to deal with that and make that more tolerable. But this is hard because at some point down the line, you're gonna have to expect some no's because we just can't keep adding.
But again, now, unless we're talking a different issue, but this particular one, again, is funded.
Yep.
And I know you're thinking, you know, if, you know, in the future it does what, you know, history has shown, I don't know that I'm looking at it like that. I have a little more faith in, because I'm looking at the historical part of the DUI grants.
Yeah.
And they have been there. Some grants, I'm totally with you, because I know what you're talking about, where they have gone away, but they're maybe more of a higher risk type of a grant, higher risk of going away. And then what do you do? Well, if this one did go away, again, you know, the county has the power to see that position goes away.
And I just saw this morning too, I get your position. I mean, everybody wants public safety, you know, it's important. And with crime rising, it was like mid-20s in the metros, and it's like 17% in the rural areas over the last year. So if you want to be safe, it takes people and money.
It does.
And the unfortunate part is I don't see this slowing down anytime in the near future anyhow.
Right.
So it's a budgetary issue. It becomes, you gotta weigh all this in there, and it's like, when it all hits at once, you know, you get a little concerned.
I'm with you. Again, this part of the budget is covered though.
Yep.
You know, it is a wash.
You know me, I am a great supporter of public safety. The problem I have with this is the same problem I have when Brian comes and says his positions are funded. And so it doesn't come from county dollars. It doesn't, but it comes from taxpayer dollars. And you know, if you don't take the grant, someone else is gonna take the grant. And so it's still taxpayer dollars. But the overall broad picture is, the taxpayer dollars spending is never ending, whether it's federal or state or county or
Yeah.
whatever. And so it
But-
may be funded not to the county, but we're still paying for it with our tax dollars.
We are, but it depends how you look at it. Do you want to fund, as us taxpayers, do we want to fund another position for Beltrami or for Hennepin?
Yeah, I know, I get that.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do get that.
I say if the grants are there, we might as well take advantage of them, because if we're paying them anyway, paying our share of them.
The difference between, and I'm not saying you do this or any other department does this, but the difference between private and government is, in private, you figure out how to do more with less. And you still provide the same service or you go out of business. In government, you don't. The money just keeps growing and the taxes just keep growing and it just keeps getting bigger. And so I'm with Shar on this, but I don't know how you stop it. You know, it's.
Yeah, because it's way bigger than we are.
Well, I will tell you what we did do, where we did do more without adding is you look at the increase in DUI arrests that we did with our existing staff. You know, we were able to do that with the staff that we have. Okay, we didn't add anybody
Right.
with that. This gives us an opportunity to to continue to do that, but to free up an officer to do what officers do as far as handling calls and all that. You know, this will strictly designate one of those deputies that we have the ability to concentrate strictly on, you know, the DUI enforcement.
Which goes to my earlier question, then can we not budget the other officer if we now are freeing up resources and we have an extra person to work on these other things? Can we get by another year without it?
Well, you look at, it's totally on the opposite part. This person is not a supervisory person, and this person will work nights when your DUIs are out. The position that I'm asking for going forward is a daytime supervisory position to be on when the other sergeant is not on. So there's a difference there. You know, I wouldn't put my DUI person on during the day, you know, just for obvious, you know, reasons. If we want to get the most bang for our buck, you have him or her working nights.
And the other option would be not to backfill this position.
That's certainly an option. I wouldn't put in for the position then if that was the case, though. I can't, because then I would be down, because this person can't take calls. This person can go on emergency calls if something happened, and I would certainly expect them to, and they are allowed to do that with the grant.
Okay.
But we can't use them as a patrolling type of a deputy sheriff, where they serve papers, where they handle crashes, where they investigate burglaries. You can't go on domestics, you can't use them in that capacity.
Okay.
So then I would be one short on somebody who does that. That would be the issue there.
Okay.
I was wondering how a future board would be alerted to, you know, the grant going away, because we don't keep on top of what grants are coming and going. How, you know, so that they can make a decision what to do. How would they know that it's coming up?
I think HR and the county administrator would come into play that way. I mean, I think HR keeps tabs on that, hey, this is a, you know, this was a grant position, and I think Gina stays on top of that. I mean, she's aware of all the people that we hire and what the circumstances were.
You'd have to catch it in the drop in budget revenue too, when you're budgeting.
We could certainly make a note and identify it in the org chart that says grant-funded position, so that every year, you know, if it's this time of the year and the grant renews October 1st and you're scheduling staff for the continuing year, there's an automatic place to review it. We just all have to be cognizant of looking at the org charts as we're doing it.
So the grant is given October 1st, but you found out now?
Yes. Yep.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm gonna vote to approve with the notation that this is a grant-funded position, and as a board, we have to let go, because who knows who's gonna be on the board if it goes away. But I agree with Corey, as much as I hate to say this, it's funded, taxpayers are funding it, and if we don't take advantage of it, some other county will take advantage of it.
And I'll second.
And just to verify, the motion is contingent on funding,
Contingent on funding,
regardless of whose decision that is later.
correct.
Well stated.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Reluctantly, aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
All right, thank you. That's the only thing I had, thankfully. And unless you have a quick question for me, I'll get out of your hair. All right, thank you.
Human Resources.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Have before you today a couple items. The first item is regarding our ancillary benefit for 2023 with our dental provider. We are asking for the action to accept MetLife as Hubbard County's 2023 ancillary benefit dental provider with the rates of employees at $31.02. The rate for an employee plus one, as stated here, is $60.79. We have gone back to our ancillary broker to say, for us, for payrolls, for benefits, we always have the 2 pay periods of the month, so that an employee can have that break, division in the premium. So we like that to be divisible by 2. So MetLife has agreed to have a rate for employee plus one of $60.78. The employee and family would be 111.06 with a 1-year guarantee, 6 and 8% caps on years 2 and 3 respectively, and cleanings do not count towards the annual maximum benefit. And this is upon a recommendation being brought before you from the Benefits Committee.
Was this a $1,000 benefit or a $1,200?
It was $1,000. The Benefit Committee looked at either, they went back to MetLife to say, will they include the $1,000 not including the premium or the cleanings, or were we going to increase that $1,000 to, I think, was it $1,200?
Yeah, okay.
Yep, and they went with the cleanings.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you, Sharon, thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
The second item that we have before you is the personnel policy, update to section 5 as the compensation plan. The request is to approve the personnel policy, section 5.00 compensation plan. This, in working to update this, we had sections 8 of payroll and sections 10 of overtime in our personnel policy as well, that we were able to incorporate all these under compensation of the umbrella. So we're able to remove those from the policy. They're incorporated basically within section 5 now. Legal counsel has reviewed the policy. One notation that we talked about from that review with legal counsel as well is section 5.11. We had an IE example verbiage there that we are removing that from the policy. So with that, the request is to approve the update to section 5 compensation plan personnel policy.
And this has been reviewed at Personnel Committee for the past couple of months, been reviewed by the department heads. The biggest issue in here is the one that we've had conversation about, is the starting pay, the starting step being something that's managed administratively rather than something that has to come to the board every time. Gives us some flexibility and a little more speed in being able to fill positions.
And I will note, just so everybody knows, that another difference in there is basically you're replacing the input on the board on some of this with the county administrator. So everybody knows that. Which I'm okay with that personally myself.
Yeah, that's exactly the clarification, that administratively, the hiring HR and the hiring supervisor have the ability to start somebody up to the midpoint of the classification. Anything beyond that would require the administrator's approval as well. But it's all tied back to the documentation of how deep they get into preferred qualifications beyond the minimum qualifications.
Yeah, I have no problem either, because that is an administrator position, or a responsibility. But it's also this board's responsibility to keep track of what each category in the budget is doing. So if you happen to see labor costs kind of going higher than what's budgeted, bring it up to a board meeting and question it.
Yeah, a properly functioning administrator would be informing the board of those things anyhow, so.
But even without being informed, it's the responsibility of commissioners to look at those things too.
Otherwise, it's cleaning things up and rolling, as Gina mentioned, rolling 3 different chapters into a single chapter on compensation.
And our goal with, as we work with the Personnel Committee and the department managers' review of these things as well too. Current policies has a lot of process and procedures in it that's not really being direct to what the policy is. So we're looking, to get those process and procedures removed from policy, get them to platforms where they're still there, and this is how we're going to procedurally, operate, but it'll just be in a different platform than in the policy.
I'll move to approve the recommendation.
Thank you, David.
I'll second.
Tom will second. Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed, motion carried.
And the final item before you is the life insurance benefit for 2023. We have, within our county offered benefit to county employees, the county provides a $10,000 term life insurance policy and accidental death and dismemberment insurance coverage to each benefit eligible employee at no cost to the employee. We've gone to our ancillary benefit broker and asked that, $10,000 in nowadays is a pretty low benefit. So they went to the provider, and the provider is willing to increase that benefit from $10,000 to $20,000 for the term and accidental death and dismemberment insurance coverage to each benefit eligible employee at no cost to the employee. Therefore, at the rate of $20,000, the coverage is $2.20. And this has been, again, reviewed by the benefit committee with the recommendation to the county board to accept that increase.
So move.
Thank you, Shar. I'll second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
You.
Mr. Chair, since we don't have a heritage update, maybe we move forward with social services budget review. And then my administrator report is primarily going to be comments relative to the overall, where we're at with the budget.
Okay.
So maybe that would be easier to have after we review Fund 10.
Okay. If Brian wants to come up right now.
And they do all have a copy of the summary that you gave them.
Mr. Chair, before we start, I have a question for Jeff here. So in looking at this request, and in other years where we haven't budgeted to a zero budget with social services?
No,
So-
there are two major changes. One, we're budgeting to zero.
Yeah, for 2023, you are budgeting to zero. Okay,
But to get there, we made some significant adjustments to expenditures and revenues. You see the expected expenditures are actually going down and the revenues are going up.
Yep.
Because in past, we budgeted the use of fund balance and we've not used it,
yep, okay,
right?
so,
So
yep,
this reflects over $1 million swing
yep,
in estimates, closer to a zero number. In this report, they are showing no use of fund balance and all of the new requests coming in the form of levy. When we get to having a conversation about my levy summary, Brian and I talked about splitting that levy request 50-50 between existing fund balance and new levy. So we'll get to that point, but I think I'll let them have carry the conversation relative to operating expenses, and then we can continue on to the conversation about the impact on levy.
okay, so I'm not trying to jump ahead, but just so I understand this better because of how it's done in past years. So Brian, your budget for 2023 does not include putting any money into the fund balance, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The intent is, if we show $600,000 worth of use of fund balance, we plan to spend the majority of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
You're all right, David?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So today we have the sheet that we gave you. We're looking at our budget for 2023, and kind of like we just talked about, budgeting to a zero $0. I guess we've had, the last few years, I think it's the last 4 years, we haven't asked for an increase in levy funds. It's been the same. I look back to before I was here, and there was actually, I think they had, it was 2017 or 18, I believe they moved. They asked for more. Yeah, 2017, 2018, and actually 2019 were all $500 to $600, even $1 million more than what we currently had requested the last 3 years. I know that it looks like a significant increase based on if you look at just the number. However, if you look at the increase that has gone over the last couple of years, and we haven't used any of our fund balance. We've returned some. We've been pretty efficient. Our revenues are actually up, and our expenditures are actually down. As what we budgeted, like Jeff mentioned, I think it is a pretty reasonable ask for this year. There are some positions we asked for originally. We had asked for 7. We narrowed that down to 4, but in reality, 3. There's some things some adjusting that we're going to do internally that will basically just offset. Basically, we're asking for a lead worker in our children's, but with that would just be a complement or a replacement. We would not replace the social worker. We would hire internally, as well as there is an ask for a collections worker and a case aide. We do have one position that we will be eliminating for 2023. The office what is the information system specialist senior position will be going away, and we've spoken with that individual as well as the union, and there are a couple of options for that individual to move into one of the two new positions. So
Brian, I'm looking at this paper that Jeff gave us.
Yep.
So Jeff or Brian, could you tell me which positions you want to retain, because there's dollar figures with them? So if you're going with 3,
So from that worksheet,
And because some things have been changing on this as well too, what I'm just handing you, there might be some edits to that as well.
correct. There's
so the 3 that are showing, the social worker, adult assignment, the child support officer, and and the collections officer,
but the collections officer has a 0 cost to it.
or the case aid adult services does.
one of
So-
those two.
So the 4 of them are actually new proposed, but we're eliminating the ISS position. So it's offsetting the cost of one of those 2.
Oh, so that's why the collections officer is 0.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay, so then, what about this amount of social worker lead child service within complement for the $7,900 increase?
That's expected that position would be reclassed to a higher classification, so there'd be additional wages, but no additional benefits or anything relative to that because it'd be the same person.
So you're still asking for that position?
We're asking for I see what you're asking, what you were asking now, yes. So we're asking for the new position of a lead worker. However, the anticipation is that position will be hired from within,
Yeah.
and then we won't backfill that. So it would just be the additional 7,900, which would be a wage increase basically, but the benefits stay the same. And then, yes, the collections worker or collections officer, we have at 0 based on that we will be eliminating the ISS position, and then the individual that's in that position will take over for either the case aide or that child, or the collections officer.
If I remember correctly in a conversation with you, we're actually losing money because we're not spending enough time on collections.
Correct. In the last year, we've had, because the two things. We have one of our income maintenance workers that's helping out with that because of the stop or the lack of applications that were coming in because nobody had to reapply with the COVID stuff that was happening. Now, September 1st, that ends. But this last year, we have been able to collect over $1 million, I believe, which we'll get back. I believe Beth said that there was a check for, I think it was like $250,000. We get 25% back from collections. And so the collections portion is, there are estates out there that we don't always get to a probate or get to in the fraud part of it as well. So with the collections officer, we're actually, I do believe, and generally speaking, the other counties that have those, they make money. That's taxpayers' money that we should be getting back.
So in summary, you're asking for 2 net full-time?
Three.
Three?
3 net. One of them is the adult social
Adult
services
services, which would be a Prime West.
Prime
and,
West.
They'll be handling specifically the SNBC, the special needs-based care within Prime West.
So if that lawsuit is settled, where the state wants it, where we would have to have 2 providers? So this person would then work with both the providers?
Correct. They would work with both providers because there is similar reimbursement rates. I believe we haven't seen what exactly the rates are because of the mediation and everything that's happening right now. But my understanding from talking to other counties that have multiple, the reimbursement rates are quite similar. So but yes, they would be working with both providers, as would
And how
all.
is this work getting done now?
How does this work? We have a couple of the Prime West workers that are also handling some of this SNBC, the special needs-based care. We don't provide as many intensive services for those individuals. There could be more services that are provided. There could be more case management stuff that's provided that then we could get capitation and reimbursement for. And so that's, our Prime West numbers are up as you look at the aging, people aging and entering into that, and with the ability or the expectations or the minimum requirements for some of these services and the threshold of income. There's more people qualifying and more people applying and more people ending up in those services. So.
These numbers, Jeff, you had on this sheet we still haven't figured out actually what's covered by the state and what actually our true cost is, correct?
No, the conversation would actually have, I think the best conversation would be to refresh our memory on the reimbursement rates by the work group or by the work unit, just to have some idea. So maybe a conversation about that.
The child support officer, which we were requesting, that has a 66% reimbursement rate for everything. And then the income maintenance, so we have, one of the case aid would be on a random moments, they call it a random moments reimbursement, which is, what would you say on average that we get reimbursement for that each position?
It varies so much.
It does vary,
It just
it varies.
depends on what they're doing at the time and how they answer the question. They'll receive X amount of emails each month asking what they're doing at that time. That's their random moment, depending on what they're working on. If they're on vacation, it's nothing.
Right.
If they're, say, doing an MA application, it could be up to 52%.
52%. So they're roughly anything that has to do with income maintenance.
That's
It's the income maintenance side. Income maintenance, there's up to a 52.3% reimbursement rate on those. And then with the adult services one that we're looking at, I mean, that's the Prime West, the capitation, which we get, and thus far has covered above and beyond the positions that we've had for those individuals.
And the additional revenue from the resized org chart is part of the reason why we're showing anticipated increased revenues over over 2022. If there are not three more impactful positions in this group, but if I look back, we had budgeted 54 positions for 21. I don't have my budgeted numbers for 22. No, we had actually paid 54 FTE in social services in 20 and 21. We are budgeting 60 with this number, which is really only three more. Because, and we wanted to have a conversation about this, because of the turnover, we never pay out 100% on our wages. We just don't. So if we had 57 budgeted and we paid 54, that would be really high. So the budgeted request is for three more FTE this year than we've paid in 20 and 21. And 22, I don't have the numbers because the last I drew was May 6th numbers. I'd have to look at it again to see how close that's getting.
So on the proposed budget, when you're talking about the reimbursement rates for the new workers, would they fall under fees for service, because that's where the large increase is? Or are they, you know, scattered throughout state and federal reimbursement?
It would be
The
scattered
reimbursements.
throughout state, federal. Fee for service, miscellaneous, those type would be, that's more of like the collection stuff,
Okay, thank you.
and then the miscellaneous revenues that come in.
So out of pure curiosity, I wanted to ask the question, so what if we said no? What's the consequences?
The consequences are that the services provided, we'll maintain those services provided. However, I do believe that the burnout with the caseloads that we have now, I know that we're getting closer to those numbers that Prime West wants us to be with the position. We would be within or right at the level that they recommend or that they state that we can have. On the collection,
We're the highest, we were way higher.
our caseloads per worker were the highest in any of Prime West counties. And it was, and so, on that position, we would still maintain, and then I, with the rate of increase, I'd probably be coming to you, or you'd be hearing from the Prime West board or from myself saying that we're not in compliance. With a collections worker, if you say no on that one, I would say that that one would be pretty detrimental to some of our increase in revenues. I mean, and that's the one that I really do believe has a great position within social services, recovering those the losses or the funds that people are abusing. Again, the MA fraud, the benefits that people, say families, again, going to probate, those, we're losing a lot of that funding right now, just we don't have the capacity.
So how do you collect that when families have already spent the money?
It goes to court, and then they have an order, garnish wages, whatever it is.
If they're not working, how do you then recoup?
Tax returns,
Revenue recapture?
revenue recaptures. You look at the COVID stuff. So there was, when they had those COVID checks and stuff, the individuals that owed money, they actually did not receive some of that monies because of that. So again, the revenue recaptures. The estates, like we place liens on estates so that it's, if they sell it or whatever. I mean, we just had this where there was a car that was worth $18,000 or something, and that, that's another, we get 25% of that back here at the county. So that's, again, a revenue for us.
And the most you can collect back is 25%, right? Out of revenue
The county share is 25%.
The county share is 25. We get back, I mean, the state will take back 100% of whatever they are owed. And so we get 25% back.
We just talked about this last night at our HRA meeting. That's why.
Yeah.
So one of the proposals is to kind of circle the wagons around the financial group within social services and add this additional position. I did this previously in Cook County. We went from just having the accountant at the fiscal administrator, and then we added a support staff to that and a collections agency. And it made all the difference. It really did. Without having that ability to concentrate on that, you're just not able to process collections. You do them when they fall in your lap, as opposed to being active and regular and looking after them, following up on them. So this one I really believe is impactful. The Prime Health one makes sense from that standpoint based on caseloads. And again, it's a big lift. If we go back to 2019 and see when we had 2.75 for levy, and we added 3% to today, we'd be asking for 3.1 million. And here if we split it, fund balance and levy, we'd be asking for 3.
And the case aid portion, with that position, adding a support staff, it'll allow, the work that they do will allow the social workers to bill more, to be doing more of that work that is billable. And it's the most efficient way, I think, to get some of those billable hours and provide those services, because the social workers then will, that are at a higher wage, a much higher wage, are able to do the work that they are intended to do, and then the case aid is able to do that administrative work or that other stuff, which some of it is billable as well, but just not at the same rate that you would be billable for a social worker.
So if you could only get 2 out of 3, which 2 would you?
Okay.
The 2 out of the 3, I would say the Prime West and the collections worker. Well, and then, I mean, of those new ones, would we be considering the adult services lead worker as well? Because that one is kind of offset. Or of the new positions, I said if we could only get 2, would it be of the collections worker, the Prime West, and the case aid?
Well, so you're saying instead of collections, you would go with the adult, if there was only 2, you'd go with the adult case aid?
No, I would go with the adult services social worker and the collections officer. Still asking that we would still be able to have that adult service or the children's services lead complement that we could have there.
For the 7,900.
Correct.
And then I had a question, Jeff. So the increase here, the county cost is 3.6 million. You said 3? So have you adjusted the number?
I have, and Brian and I talked, and we showed, on the bottom of his form, he's showing 3.6 million and 0 use of levy.
Yep.
And we've changed our assumption, and I've thrown $625,000 worth of fund balance in there, which reduces the levy to 2,982.
And that does also allow us to stay within the legislative guidelines of what we need, what we can have within fund balance.
Last month's fund balance was 4.7, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, and so that, it makes the levy,
4.698,
what is it?
2,982,265. And I can print you an updated copy of the levy summary.
And the fund balance, Brian, was what last month?
For July, at the end of July, the fund balance was 4.698,597.71.
But it's interesting to note that the fund balance June of this year is $800,000 less than June of last year.
Oh, okay, so you did use.
It fluctuates throughout the course of the year, and
Depending on when we get the reimbursements
when
and
we get
stuff, it does
reimbursements,
fluctuate, yeah.
But June to June should be a relatively safe comparison.
Or July to July generally, I think is,
Well, June, the taxes come in, so.
oh, yeah, okay.
When the taxes come in, but we shouldn't have, would June month end have included second quarter reimbursements?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, so, okay, yeah. So
It's-
June, July, it could be, it's kind of a date line.
Right, and if we're looking at like our levy or our budget, our total budget of the 8.6, I believe the statute, I believe it's right around that 50% of what you should.
Probably 42.
What's that?
Probably 42.
42% you should have, and we generally sit about that 50%. So that using the 620,000 would then put us closer to that legislative.
I think that, the struggle, I'm sure these guys are having the same struggle I am having, is everything's hitting at once.
Correct.
This year, big potential coal, all
Yep.
these costs, all these.
Correct.
If you want to keep good employees, it's costing a lot more money today than it did 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm interested in how instead of going, trying to go,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
smooth it out a little bit over multiple years rather than
Right.
getting it all now.
Yep. And I totally, regardless of what's decided, I know that our staff will continue to do the good work and serve the county residents as they are. But I know that, getting some support, even a couple of positions, that would help out greatly, so.
So when I looked at, and I think of the fund balance, and that looks like such a large dollar amount, but when you start thinking about what happens to dollars, and so an example that would be the expenditures that were in our board packet, so the sex offender, where I think it was 58,000, is that just for one person?
I'd have to look at that exactly, but yes, there's,
Because you have to, I remember
Yeah.
we were housing somebody a couple years ago, and it was $30-some thousand a month.
yeah, I think in that board, I believe it is that just one individual, and those are just ones that were mandated to pay.
Yeah, because the fund balance sounds large, but it can go down really quickly.
Correct. It could, for sure. And, and that's, one of those things that we're fighting at Max with that is how does that translate? Why are the costs so astronomical? I know it does cost to have people there, but does it increase that much every year? Because it's gone up year to year to year, and I don't know. I don't have all the answers. If I did, I'd be in a different position. But you're right. The fund balance could go.
So I guess I'm saying I want to maintain a really healthy
Correct.
fund balance.
Right, and I do too, for sure. But if this year it happens that, to get the things that we need to get to help out and really save some on the taxpayers' dollars as well, I think that would be a just use of the fund balance to help that out.
And in the past, we were budgeting and basically creating a reserve for the reserve.
Correct.
It
Yes.
wasn't an actual budget.
No.
The reserve is there, and if you do have to take the reserve down, then you have to address that in the next year's budget.
Correct.
You don't need a reserve for the reserve.
Correct.
You're
Right.
taking the money early then.
We also use that
Mm-hmm.
as a justification to hold the levy for social services flat for 4 years.
Correct.
So if we're going to try to budget to zero, then we have to address the fact that some of that. So if we just look at last year's budget of 2.35 million for levy and 1.8 in the use of fund balance, that's $4.2 million, as opposed to we're showing a need of 3.6 net of operations
Right.
total. And I hope that gets us a lot closer. I don't want to have budget to use of $1.8 million for the fund balance and only use one. That doesn't, we want to be budgeting much closer to that.
Right.
I'm kind of hoping we're within 4 or 5% this year when we get this done. I kind of hope to have everybody else within 1 or 2%, because they're easier numbers to manage.
Right.
There are fewer variables outside of the issues we have with law enforcement, but everything else is relatively, you can look at the department reports and look at the expenditures year-to-date, 58%, go down in expenditures and see that we're at 56 or 57%, right? That's where we should be. If we're not, that means we haven't incurred an expense, and if we're over, that means we incurred an expense for the full year.
Right.
So anyway.
And those big hitters, I know that we've talked about it before, the state-operated services, those can be quite hefty at times, depending on how that works, as well as out-of-home placements. And that's
That's what the reserve's for.
That's what the reserves, exactly, that's what the reserve's for. And so that's what we had, when I looked at the budget, I reduced those budget line item numbers from what they had to be to a more reasonable number, because based on, yes, that's what the fund balance is for, and that's what that's for, and if it happens, because you never know.
Healthy reserve, it's not like you don't have time
Correct.
to get it back where it belongs.
Right.
If it dips down below.
Yep. And that's,
Don't
again,
have a healthy reserve and it happens, now you got a problem.
then you end up like our neighbors to the north.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And I feel that we're at a pretty good spot.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I have a non-budget comment. Would this be a good time to say that? Or, so I was at Action Park Rapids last Thursday, and there were 2 people from your department there. And it was really fun to watch, because Action Park Rapids is all about trying to connect different organizations within the county to meet needs together. And it was really beneficial that the 2 people from social services was there, because they made 3 different connections that day, back and forth, just from the hour-and-a-half conversation. So it was really fun to see Action Park Rapids doing what it's
Supposed to be doing.
supposed to be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I agree 100% with that, as well as the supervisors meeting that we're having now. My supervisors are starting to get quite a few questions from other departments that we can help out in different scenarios, so.
I went to the last supervisors meeting after the last board meeting, and we did a little strategic planning update with the group, and we did a little SOAR analysis as opposed to a SWOT analysis, and the item that came up out of that, asking some questions, we didn't really intend to solve any problems. I just wanted to have an idea, start thinking strategically, and start thinking as a group rather than thinking within just your work unit. And I don't remember who said it, and it's not important, but it underlined the values of the work that group does, and the statement was, we help keep families together. So I don't think anybody disagrees with that statement. I know everybody is conscious of the cost of those services, statewide and locally. But I think that was a really good piece of work to come out of that half-an-hour conversation and planning, and hopefully it's a place to start working from.
And that reminds me, one of the persons attending from the social services talked about how foster care is needed. And I had a conversation this last week, and I know you have no control over this, but they applied to be foster parents in the state of Minnesota for a family member. And her comment was, it was such a difficult process because of all the paperwork. If it hadn't been a family member, they would have quit. And what a tragedy that is when we need foster care homes and people are so discouraged over the paperwork.
Yeah. It is a travesty that happens. That happens all the time. It does. We've had cases of children that have started to go through the adoption process, and they're in their foster homes, and everything's going good, and then the paperwork gets so messed up that the adoptions don't always go through. And telling a kid that thought that they were getting adopted, it's not. It's just.
It's more than paperwork. You have to have your home inspected.
Oh yeah.
When we adopted, we had to get egress windows put in.
Right.
All kinds of stuff.
Right.
But, we did it.
Right. You did it because you cared and that you wanted to do that. But yeah, it can be, which I think that our foster care licensor, she's doing a really amazing job at doing some of the community outreach stuff, and trying to get that word out there and help. So
So you have somebody on staff that could help people navigate the paperwork?
yeah. So I think it was last year that we got the children's services, but a licensing social worker, and she came on board. She had worked for MinAdopt, and she's just doing an amazing job at helping out, for sure.
Thank you. Anything else from the board? From you?
I have nothing else. I just appreciate the time today, for sure.
I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you.
Both of you.
And have a good day.
Thanks.
So for sake of conversation, I think I'm gonna drag my worksheet over here so you can see it. And after our last board meeting, I told you I'd be taking this to the department head meeting and having a conversation and throwing some things up for consideration. This first group are allocations from Enbridge capture towards capital, and that's showing as $1,010,000. We identified a benefits liability that we put the whole liability on there instead of the expense we actually expect to incur in 2023. I threw the possibility of, after hearing conversations about not having a phased retirement option. That's the value of that. Delete the wellness program expense and add in the Medica wellness dollars. Those were kind of duplicated entries. Reduce part-time wages in sheriff's office to offset the request for the daytime sergeant. Corey and Scott both represent if they have that person, they can fill in the roles and they wouldn't call in part-time people, so they'd be willing to make that happen. I haven't had this conversation yet, but reduce medical expense. The medical expense budget line more than doubled. Now, we know it's gonna go up because we have more people in the jail, but I don't know that it's necessarily gonna more than double, so that's a conversation to have. Interest income, expected interest income, I think there's some room to ask for some more revenue out of that, and we're exploring options for that to happen. And then a reduction in a building improvement line. We put that $250 in for this roof, and we don't need all of it, so I think I can give some of it back when we actually bid and do that project next year. So you can see that in that we made a $1.84 million adjustment. A lot of it is just the reuse of captured funds, and $831,000 is actual additional revenue or reduced expenditures. Then if I flip down to this book, which is kind of how I balance it, you can see where I put the 550 in to general against parks and a couple of other items and building, and then 460 in public safety for radios and first year license software acquisition, and then I'm showing the $625,000 a use of fund balance from social services. In that, you can see that the increases in the fund balance request are in here, but you can see the increase to our existing levy by line item is right here. And even with the reduction from public safety, we need a 7% increase on $1.6 million to carry the requested budget. We need 4% for general operations, 4% for social services, and the $200,000 ask from Highway Department, I think, is also, it's been held for too long. We need to consider raising that, and that's a small amount. So that, just that operational increase is 16%. Now that, all of those savings that I showed you before are not calculated in here, they're calculated down here. So when I make the adjustment of reusing this capture from Enbridge, and we use $1,010,000, we have $590,000 unallocated, we need a levy of $20,200. And then I carry that down here and I show that $831,000 worth of savings. It brings us, instead of a 36% levy increase, it drops us to 20%. That's a big number. 12% of that is the choice to capture this Enbridge amount. 8% of that is operational increase. So that was my goal, to get to this point, to show that, to continue to show the capture of Enbridge being 12%. It's the only chance we have to capture that. If we allocate that towards operations, it just goes away and it's absorbed and we never get it back. Now, there's certainly conversation to be had, is this the right number? I haven't had a chance to do any modeling on what this will actually do for taxes, but we will have an opportunity to do that. But I think we've made some really good corrections in the expenditure and revenue accounts. And honestly, given all of these changes and given the cost of doing business and inflation this year, an 8% operational is not a bad starting point.
So I'm thinking back to, we purposely delayed things to have a 0% levy increase that year because of COVID. And we were helping businesses and the people out. And yet, in looking through the requests here and seeing these huge numbers, I don't see us having, or doing the 0% that year playing a big factor into this. Do you see what I'm trying to say? I don't feel like we put off a lot of stuff that year, and that's contributing to this huge number.
Right, and that can be expected. The purpose of when we did that was, to not put burden on people at the time when they could least afford it.
But
Not that it's not gonna come back and catch up to you.
Yeah, but I'm saying I don't think that 0% played into a lot of the numbers that we're seeing this year.
I don't think it's the biggest contributing factor.
No.
It always comes back to take a bite.
Yeah, but it's not the driving factor.
No, the half of the increase is the change in operation relative to the jail. The increasing of our average daily population from low 50s to mid 70s of our prisoners has flipped that operation by more than $500,000 a year. And we're gonna recognize that this year. We're gonna be over. And if we don't structurally address how that is working, we have to pay for that, because there's no other source of revenue for that when you look at that. One thing that I did want to point out is with the increase in taxable market value and a 20% increase on the levy, the county tax rate still comes down by 2.5%. When I go over here and I show the tax capacity including Enbridge, it actually drops by 5%. It's still going to mean increased taxes for people whose home values went up significantly. But I haven't done the modeling. But the rate, can you imagine having this conversation in Wadena County?
Mm-hmm.
With a tax rate of 80%? So I wanted to show that because I think that that's an important part of the context. We'll use that information to show the modeling on some sample actual tax bills. But you can see here in public safety, we got $8.5 million of expense and $1 million worth of revenue. And that revenue projection is 13% less for 23 than it is in 22. And in 22, we're not gonna reach the estimated amount that we budgeted. So if that is the nature of how things need to operate, we need a 8% increase in the levy just to carry that. And we're finding creative ways to offset everything else. The highway department use of fund balance, that's not really a use of fund balance. That's carrying over their project money from one year to the next. And solid waste, we'll have a conversation about whether they're gonna use fund balance or whether they're gonna deal with fees, or how we're going to account for their capital needs, or if this is the year to do it. This is the list we're gonna continue to work on. faces look more grim than 3 weeks ago, and I just cut 15%.
What's the schedule coming up next, first meeting of the month next year?
Yeah, let me review that quickly. So we moved the sheriff's office to September 6th because Scott was not able to be here today. And then on September 13th, we'll have solid waste, road and bridge, library, and SWCD.
And the libraries, did you get a hold of Melissa?
I did, and Melissa's gonna be here for that.
Okay.
And I talked to Crystal yesterday, and she'll be available that day, and if she can't, she'll send staff.
I thought you probably mentioned it during the committee reports that, yeah, the library is requesting 3% more for 2023. So probably bring our figures along. But that's subtracting out 35,000 already from what they're actually gonna be budgeting,
Okay.
Because they're using that balance?
using the reserves.
At our next meeting, I'll have the staffing reports, the FTE by department, and the history of that, which I think is really important to look at as well. No, by our next meeting, we will not have had our first negotiation meetings, but we will be having them that week. So all the assumptions in the background that I reviewed at the last meeting, that there's a couple, 3 big balls in the air. We're assuming that there's room for all of those to happen at the same time. But we have to negotiate to get there.
Well, we've seen what negative things have happened to communities that are defunding their law enforcement. So whatever we decide, the residents here want to be safe.
And I think the data relative to the staffing assumptions, the staffing requirements for jail and dispatch, right, because of based on the population, and then the patrol allocations, day, night, and weekend, are the other assumptions that Scott's working to put together for me, and they'll be part of the, because you can't just say we're gonna cut the public safety budget. You'd have to say where. Where do we not need as much coverage as you're currently budgeting for? And then look at the administrative form of that and say, do we have the right amount of administration for the size of the organization? I don't have any reason to believe that anything's out of line, but if we don't have a conversation that includes those points, we don't get the full context when we look at that $8.5 million. So again, if people have specific questions, let me know. I can print you a new copy of my levy summary that shows those current assumptions. It also shows the adjustments made to this date. And we can continue working from there. The only other item I had relative to an administrator update was that we, and Commissioner Delahunt will mention this as well, but we had a meeting with Lakeshore, Belle Taine Lake Association members talking about the possibility of creating a lake improvement district. I don't think that's new news, but they did ask if they could appear at the work session in September to review their proposal with the board. And we're gonna have a busy day, so if we do that, I would imagine we've got at least 2.5 hours worth of budget before we would get to that. But they're fairly adamant that if they're gonna do it, they need to do it before summer's over. I said September 13th kind of is past the end of summer, but that's their request. So it's up to you if you wanna put them on that meeting. I think that would carry us to noon on that day, which wouldn't be awful.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. I'll put them on the schedule and call John.
He's the about all morning, even then some.
Yeah. I've got all day.
Oh, okay.
That would be all that I have.
Alrighty. Next, we'll move on to the committee reports. Would you like to start, David?
Sure. Just got one item besides Jeff got the one covered. Tom and I, just for your information, we sat and Jeff through an animal impoundment hearing the other day, and it worked out fine. Resolution was found where I think it was not only good for the county, but good for the owner of the dog too, so it worked out fine. And that's all I have. I'm kinda quiet committee-wise.
Okay. Tom?
Let's see, I was gonna mention the Mental Health Board, LAC, and I already said one of them is that, had some discussion on needs, and they were wondering what can be done for people with issues with alcohol. And they were wondering, does the county have a halfway house here? And they really don't. But anyways, that's one of the needs they brought up. Another one was housing. We really don't see tents parked around, like you do like in LA or in San Francisco and all that, but sounds like there's still an issue with homelessness in Park Rapids area. They're finding areas to stay, but that was brought up. And another issue I believe is probably going to be solved by a recent hire that we've had, Craig Kilmore, with the dispatch, because they said they were having issues with trying to get the bus coming out to pick them up, the dispatch, and so that'll probably be taken care of. Just some issues that they brought up.
Thank you. And Shar?
So Action Park Rapids last week, the representation was Kinship, United Way, Sanford, Northwest Foundation, the library, HLDC, HIP, the chamber, social services, and then myself for the county. Let's see, Kinship needs mentors for 8 kids. Social services talked about the need for foster homes. I found out some really interesting things about the library. So they had 300 kids in the summer program. Half of them have completed that so far. They have hotspots that the public can sign out. And she said there was a large amount of people that come in to use a computer that have never used one. I was just floored by that. But let's see, they have a state park pass that you can come in and use for a week of free usage. And then now they have 7 yesteryear kits. It was designed for dementia, but they have other organizations that are using them. They have themes. They'll come in and, like, I think she said there was a church group coming in that was using one from the 1950s, and it had to do with hymns and something else. So anyway, that was really interesting. The library, the HRA, and the senior center are going to post flyers for events that are going on in the community. Excuse me. The HRA would post them at the apartments. The person representing the senior center is trying to connect the senior center to resources in the county, so she was new to the group. And then this is really interesting, the Pregnancy Resource Center was represented there. And last year at this time, in July, they were serving 5 clients. And this year at this time, they were serving 35. And what changed was the person went to the schools and found the pregnant girls, and then has set up classes where she can text the class to their phone. They participate in it, and get verification for it, and then they come back and they get bucks to spend at the Pregnancy Resource Center. But I was just amazed to go from 5 to 35 clients in 1 year. That's huge. And so then part of the conversation between social services was going to connect with Pregnancy Resource outside of Action Park Rapids to see how they could then get referrals there also. So that was really encouraging. So Action Park Rapids after COVID revamped, and this seems to be a much more efficient way and a useful way to get people involved. And the new chamber, Derek, I can't remember his last name, Ricky, he was there too, so it was nice to meet him. Then last night, HRA had a meeting, and the new software gives us accurate financial information as to what the cost is per unit. And it also gives accurate information who people that either have been evicted or left, or are currently living in an apartment but are not current on their rent. And there's a subcommittee that was formed, and 2 of the people on the subcommittee are doing rentals as a private business, and so they're a great asset. And a subcommittee was formed to develop policy in how to handle. This discussion came that actually we're being too lenient on the rent. As far as if they don't have money to pay, we're offering them too much time and actually enabling a person to go further in debt. And it talked about, what do we do if a person gets kicked out? But there are resources. Even the homeless, there are resources if they choose not to be homeless, between Mojave and Social Services, and I think there was 2 others listed. So there's some really tough decisions the HRA board's gonna have to make. The 2 private people on the board that talked about how if you don't pay your rent by the 5th, you have, I think it was, what was it called, 3 days, 3 to 5 days to catch up, or you're out, you're just out. And so they both said, it's a really tough business to be in, but if you're not strict, you'll go broke. And so we talked last night in the HRA, if we don't change how we're doing the rent in the HRA, we won't have facilities to collect rent on, because we won't be able to financially carry it. So, interesting discussion. And then Mary shared that the HLDC, she had put in for a USDA rural development grant, and that was awarded. She told the HRA last night, so that's $195,000. And so for the HRA, that equates to $25,000 per year for 3 years. And then the HLDC, the amount is $120,000, and when she applied for that, that was for planning the subdivision, that 40 acres that the HLDC bought. So that $120,000 will cover the first stages of development. So to get the $195,000 grant is huge. So, oh, and one more thing, the volunteer, if you go to Park Rapids, let's see, Park Rapids has a website where you can go in and see where you volunteer, and United Way has now taken that over. So if you're ever interested in looking for the ways to volunteer, it's unitedwaybemidji.org/Hubbard County. And if you go in there, there's different organizations, they have listed how you can volunteer.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I, like every month, the first 2 weeks are pretty sparse as far as committees and boards that I'm on. I did have my first HRDC Executive Board meeting last week. I can't say anything because it was on employee matters. So I basically am done. I have no committee reports. The only thing I have is the managers meeting on the 30th. I believe it's Dan's turn, and I'm thinking Dan's gonna be back in town.
I believe so.
You know what, I forgot, I was thinking we'd had a board meeting since Prime West, but we didn't, so I have one more thing to report on.
Okay.
So, we had a discussion, and we are giving Red Lake a grant to help, let's see. They're doing, you know what, I need to get further, I had more on my computer. I'm gonna report on that later.
Okay.
Okay.
I have one more thing. I will be on vacation Labor Day to the 11th, for that week anyhow, so I won't be here the meeting of the 6th.
No Zoom option or anything? No Zoom option or anything? You'll be-
If there's something pressing, I can work on that. If there's nothing pressing, I don't know that it's
I'm
worth
not
the
aware of
effort.
anything other than we've already talked, we'll be dealing sheriff's office budget and have opportunity for discussion before and after that too.
I got one thing.
Go ahead.
I'm not on vacation too. I'll be gone from this Friday, 19th, to September 3rd. But if this thing about heritage living comes up with a special meeting, and there's a decision to be made, I'd sure like to find a way to be in with that. If we can get a 10-day notice, I can give you an address then,
Yeah,
even when I'm on vacation.
Well, if it's a special meeting, it'll only be 3-day notice, so we'll,
Okay.
yeah, we'll have a different, and if it's just an update, maybe I can provide it electronically. If we get to the point of needing the decision, that's when we'd have to call a board meeting.
Okay. So if there's a decision.
If there's a
I'd like
decision to
see
be
that.
made, I'd absolutely make sure everybody knew.
So Jeff sent out a link for the ACES Summit. So I went in there to register, there's a $50 fee. So I'm wondering if any of us that wanna go could have Denise register us and just pay it on the county credit card. It would be by far the easiest. So Denise, would you register me? Are any of the rest of you going? It's August 30th, from 8:30 to 3:30. I can attend in the morning. I have 3 meetings that day.
I think Dan was planning on attending too. We probably want
I
to
think so
confirm with
too,
him.
because he's involved in HIP. So I'm not sure he's gonna make the managers meeting that day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We can track down schedules.
Okay. Yeah, but you said 8:30 to 3:30?
It is, and there's different sessions, so you
Oh,
don't
okay.
have to attend the whole day. So if you wanted to go for part of the day, because like I can only go in the morning, but
Okay. Yeah, and I see that's what I have on my calendar here. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to attend, but,
okay.
alrighty. There's nothing else? Need a motion to adjourn?
I won't.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, David. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.